Barry was already a legend among the monks of the St. Bernard Monastery. With his infallible nose and an almost supernatural instinct, he had rescued dozens of travelers who became lost or trapped in the relentless storms of the Swiss Alps. But that night, the winds were stronger, the snow was falling heavier, and the urgency of the mission carried a different weight. A traveler had gone missing, and time was critical. The monks were anxious. The man's life depended on Barry. He seemed to understand this as he raised his head at the sound of the command to depart. The monks equipped Barry as always. The small wooden barrel filled with brandy was strapped around his neck, not just as a symbol of hope but as a last resort to warm the body of someone on the brink of death. Barry left the monastery in the midst of the storm, his sharp eyes and relentless nose working as the wind howled around him. Every step was a battle against the rapidly accumulating snow, making the terrain slippery and treacherous. But he pressed on with the same determination as always, guided by his sense of smell and duty. The snow swallowed everything around him, erasing any sign of trails or footprints. The world seemed to be nothing but white and empty, a frozen desert. Yet Barry didn't need visible signs. He followed the faint scent he had picked up, a distant smell of wet clothes and sweat that most humans would never notice. It was almost imperceptible, but for Barry, it was enough. He was trained for this. It was his gift. As he advanced, the cold began to weigh on his paws, ice accumulating in his thick fur. He paused occasionally to shake off the snow's weight but never stopped moving forward. Hours passed. The traveler, a middle-aged man who had underestimated the fury of the mountains, was now on the verge of death. He had lost his way in the snowstorm and, after falling into a small ravine, became trapped under a thin layer of snow. The temperature was so low that his body barely responded, his fingers frozen, his mind teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. He was alone, darkness slowly enveloping him, until suddenly he heard something. A bark. Weak but unmistakable. And then, through the snow, a large, imposing figure emerged. Barry. Finding the man partially buried, Barry immediately sprang into action. He used his paws to dig around the man's body, clearing away the snow that trapped him. The traveler, now semi-conscious, felt the warmth of the dog's body as Barry lay beside him. Barry stayed close to him, shielding him from the falling snow and preventing the cold from taking over completely. Even without fully understanding what was happening, the man felt a flicker of hope. He was no longer alone. Barry knew he needed to call for help but couldn't leave the man vulnerable to the cold. He tried barking, his sounds echoing through the mountains, but the storm muffled everything. He moved back and forth, alert to any sound indicating the monk's approach. There was no one in sight. The mountain was silent except for the sound of the wind cutting through the air. Barry lay back down beside the traveler, warming him with his body. The man began to regain some strength but was still far from being able to move on his own. Barry knew time was short. Suddenly, a terrible sound echoed across the mountain. It was the rumble of a landslide. Barry stood immediately, his fur bristling as if he understood the imminent danger. The avalanche was coming. He looked at the man and then at the horizon, his instincts racing. He knew there was no way to escape with the man trapped there. It was an impossible choice. Save himself or stay and protect the stranger to the end. Barry didn't hesitate. As always, he chose the other over himself. The rumble of the avalanche was like thunder rolling through the mountains, echoing in all directions. Barry's ears perked up instantly, his entire body on high alert. He knew what it meant. The avalanche was coming, and it would spare nothing in its path. The mountain, already dangerous, had now become deadly. He looked at the semi-conscious man, still partially buried in the snow, then at the horizon where the mass of snow began to break loose. Barry was torn between the instinct to survive and the mission that weighed on his heart. But for Barry, the choice was clear: he would stay. The avalanche was approaching quickly, a furious white sea that would swallow everything in its path. Barry began digging with all his strength, trying to free the traveler from the snow that trapped him. His paws were wounded, cut by the sharp ice, but he didn't stop. Every second counted. With each movement, he managed to remove more snow, revealing the man's legs and torso. But the traveler still didn't have the strength to move on his own. Barry knew he couldn't carry him out of danger, it was too late. He would have to try another strategy. With no other option, Barry lay over the man's body, covering him with his massive frame. He used his weight to press the man against the ground, trying to create a barrier between him and the snow that would soon engulf them. Barry's body heat continued to warm the man, even in the deadly cold. The traveler opened his eyes for a brief moment, confused and trembling, but he felt the dog's comforting and protective weight. He didn't understand how, but he knew this animal was fighting to save him. The sound of the avalanche was deafening now. Barry looked up, seeing the wall of snow rushing down. He had nowhere left to run, and escape wasn't an option. He focused solely on protecting the man beneath him, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Barry closed his eyes as the impact of the snow hit them, burying them completely. The world plunged into absolute silence, buried under tons of ice and snow. The storm continued to rage above them, but there, in the darkness, everything was still. The snow pressed heavily on Barry's body, making it difficult for him to breathe. Every movement was a struggle against the crushing weight surrounding them. But he was still alive. With the little strength he had left, he began to move, trying to create an opening in the snow so the man could breathe. He used his paws and snout to dig small holes, fighting against the suffocating sensation. After minutes that felt like an eternity, he managed to open a small air pocket. The man was breathing, weakly, but alive. Exhaustion began to take hold of Barry. His paws were nearly frozen, and the effort to move under the weight of the snow drained his last reserves of energy. Even so, he didn't give up. He alternated between digging and lying back down over the man to protect him. For Barry, the traveler's life was more important than his own. He didn't know how long he would have to hold on, but he would do everything in his power to keep the man alive. Barry was fighting not just against the snow but also against the limits of his own body. In that moment, Barry wasn't thinking of himself. He didn't understand concepts like sacrifice or heroism. All he knew was that his mission was to save lives, and he would do so until his last breath. He couldn't predict if anyone would come to rescue them. All he could do was keep fighting, even as hope seemed to fade into the icy silence of the mountain. Barry had made his choice, and that choice would change everything. The mountain had plunged into an eerie silence. The avalanche had passed, leaving behind an unrecognizable landscape. Where there had once been a valley, there was now only an expansive sheet of compacted snow. Barry and the traveler were buried, encased beneath tons of ice. The monks, who had followed the tracks Barry left behind, stopped in despair when they saw everything was covered. They knew that if they didn't find the two quickly, the cold would finish the job the avalanche hadn't. Guided by their faith and training, the monks began to dig, relying on their intuition and Barry's knowledge. The dog was known for always choosing the safest paths, and they knew he would never give up as long as there was a life to save. Even so, fear grew with each passing minute. The chances of finding them alive were rapidly diminishing. The snow was compacted and heavy, making the digging difficult. Still, they continued, praying for Barry to give them a sign. Then they heard it. A faint sound, muffled but unmistakable. Barry's bark. At first, the monks thought it was just their imagination, but the sound repeated, coming from beneath the snow. The leader of the group shouted for them to dig at that spot, and everyone joined in a frantic effort. They dug with their hands and improvised tools, every movement fueled by the hope that Barry and the man were still alive. The barking grew weaker, but it was there, persistent, guiding them. After minutes that felt like hours, the first breach was opened in the snow. The sight was heartbreaking. Barry was there, completely still, covering the traveler with his body. The snow still partially surrounded him, but it was clear that he had used his own body to protect the man. The monks hurried to dig them out completely. First, they lifted Barry off the man and examined him. He was alive but so exhausted and injured that he could barely lift his head. Even so, he tried to lick one of the monk's hands, as if to say he had done his part. The traveler, on the other hand, was in critical condition but miraculously alive. He was carefully removed from the snow, still warmed by Barry's body heat. The monks wrapped him in blankets and carried him back to the monastery, where he would receive treatment. The man, with tears in his eyes and a weak voice, could only murmur words of gratitude. "He saved me," He stayed with me the whole time. I don't know how to thank him." Barry, however, could barely move. The monks carried him back to the monastery in their arms, treating him as the true hero he was. The weight of that mission had been too much for his body, but he still had a calm look, as if he knew everything had ended well. At the monastery, he was placed in a warm, safe spot where the monks tended to his wounds and covered him with all the love and gratitude they could offer. Barry had completed his most difficult mission, and his miraculous rescue would be remembered by all who witnessed the bravery of this extraordinary dog. Barry was brought to the monastery with the utmost care, cradled in the arms of the monks who loved and respected him deeply. He was exhausted, injured, and his body was nearly frozen. His paws were full of cuts caused by the ice, and the tremendous effort of protecting the traveler had drained his strength. Yet even in his weakened state, his eyes still shone with serene calmness, as if he knew he had fulfilled his duty. He was where he belonged, at home, among those who had always trusted him. The monks did everything they could to warm him and ease his suffering. While the monks cared for Barry, the traveler he had saved was being treated in another wing of the monastery. The man couldn't hold back his tears as he recounted what had happened. "He never left me. Even when the avalanche came, he stayed there, protecting me with his own body. I was certain I would die, but Barry never gave up." His words, full of emotion, echoed through the monastery. To that man, Barry wasn't just a dog, he was an angel sent to save him. However, despite the monks' efforts, Barry's condition worsened with each passing hour. His body, which had endured so many missions over the years, could no longer recover. He was too weak, and the cold he had faced during the avalanche had caused irreversible damage. The monks knew he didn't have much time left. They took turns by his side, offering love and comfort in his final moments. Some prayed, while others simply watched, unable to hold back their tears at the sacrifice of their most loyal companion. Barry, even in his final moments, continued to embody the essence of who he was, a symbol of kindness and devotion. He tried to lift his head when he heard the monks' voices, lightly wagging his tail as if to show he was at peace. One of the older monks knelt beside him and whispered, "You saved so many lives, Barry. Now it's time to rest. We will never forget what you've done." Barry seemed to understand those words, slowly closing his eyes while still feeling the gentle touch of his caregivers. At dawn that day, Barry took his last breath. His passing was silent but full of meaning. To the monks, he wasn't just a rescue animal, he was a companion, a hero, and an inspiration. One of the monks carried with him a notebook in which he recorded all of Barry's missions. At that moment, he wrote his final words about the dog. Barry gave everything he had until the end. He never hesitated to put others' lives above his own. Today, we lost a friend, but his spirit will live on forever among us. The monastery organized a small funeral for Barry, something rare for an animal but well-deserved for everything he had done. His body was buried in a special place where monks and travelers could pay their respects. Later, his body would be preserved and taken to the Natural History Museum of Bern, where it would be displayed as a symbol of courage and sacrifice. Barry gave his life for others, and his legacy would live on, inspiring not only the dogs that came after him but also everyone who heard his story. Barry was not just a rescue dog. He was a symbol of bravery, compassion, and sacrifice. After his death, the monks of the St. Bernard Monastery ensured that his memory was preserved. They understood that Barry's story needed to be told, not only as a tribute to him but also as an inspiration for future generations. His grave, located near the monastery, became a place of pilgrimage for travelers and shepherds who were moved by the extraordinary deeds of the dog who had saved so many lives. Barry represented the best a living being could offer, unconditional love for others. Barry's impact did not stop there. Recognizing his importance, Barry's body was carefully preserved and sent to the Natural History Museum of Bern in Switzerland. There, he was placed on display as a historical landmark so that everyone could learn about the dog who defied the mountains and the impossible. His exhibit was not just a tribute, it was a constant reminder of how courage and altruism can exist even in the darkest moments. Hundreds of visitors began to visit the museum annually, captivated and moved by Barry's story. Moreover, the work Barry began continued to influence the training of rescue dogs for centuries. The St. Bernard breed, with its physical strength, endurance, and gentle temperament, became the top choice for missions in extreme environments. The methods the monks used to train Barry were refined and adapted, and to this day, rescue dogs carry on the legacy of the work he started. Many of the dogs working in the Alps are affectionately nicknamed Barry in his honor, perpetuating the name of the hero who defied death more than 40 times. But Barry's legacy is not just in rescue dogs. It is also in the lessons he left for humanity. His story is told in schools, mentioned in books, and passed down through generations as an example of what it means to sacrifice oneself for the good of others. In a world often dominated by indifference, Barry reminds us that heroism can be found in the simplest actions: caring, protecting, and fighting for others. He proved that even an animal can demonstrate the depths of altruism and courage, often more than any human. Today, centuries after his final mission, Barry is still remembered as the dog who defied the mountains and left an eternal mark on the hearts of all who heard his story. His figure, displayed in the museum, continues to inspire those who see it. No matter how cold or inhospitable the environment, Barry proved that determination and true love can overcome any adversity. The world may have changed, but Barry's legacy remains an eternal symbol of hope, bravery, and compassion. Barry never sought recognition. He didn't understand the concept of fame or legacy. All he knew was that his mission was to save lives, even at the cost of his own. He reminds us that true heroism doesn't come from physical strength, but from the strength of the heart. In the Swiss Alps, where the snow still falls and the mountains continue to challenge humanity, Barry's story remains alive. He is an eternal symbol of courage and loyalty. And even now, centuries later, Barry continues to inspire the world. Barry was more than a dog. He was a hero, and his final mission taught us the true meaning of sacrifice.